Cade Klubnik was the preseason star for the Jets in Game 1. Tonight, it's David Bailey's time to shine. Let's preview Jets Steelers.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm John B. from GanggreenNation.com, and today's episode is brought to you by CalSheet. For a limited time, download the CalSheet app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade $10. On today's show, we are previewing preseason Game 2. The Jets visit the Pittsburgh Steelers tonight. Kickoff time scheduled for 7 p.m. Eastern. The game will be shown locally on TV on WCBS2. And if you're outside the New York area, well, you're in luck because the game will also be shown on NFL Network. Lots of players trying to impress the Jets coaching staff in this one. Some guys low on the depth chart, looking to either improve or continue a strong start to the preseason. Some key backups will get some important reps, but there are also some high-profile players looking to make a good impression as we move into the regular season, and that's where we will begin. Last week was mainly about Cade Klubnik. He was the guy who generated most of the attention, and why not? Rookie quarterback making his NFL debut, getting a surprise start because Geno Smith had a minor ankle injury he was dealing with, and the Jets were playing it safe smartly by not putting Geno on the field. Even if he's even a little banged up, there's no point in risking it for a preseason game. So Klubnik got the start and played well. The other high-profile rookie for this team is David Bailey. Bailey also got the start, and his game was pretty quiet. Now, he was only in there for a series, only got a handful of snaps. Did not make much of an impression. I've seen some people say that he got close to the quarterback a couple of times. I feel like Tampa Bay handled him pretty well. There were a couple of times where he ran a stunt and was able to penetrate to a degree, but was kind of running into a double team because the Jets did not execute the stunt very well. A couple of times it looked like maybe he had a step, but kind of got handled by the guy who was blocking him. And none of this is a big deal. This is a handful of preseason snaps. I don't think anybody should get upset over that, particularly because by all accounts, Bailey's been fantastic in training camp. I mean, he's looked the part most days in practice, according to the people who have been in the facility. So, I think a couple of preseason snaps where he doesn't do a lot of big things isn't anything to panic over. And let's be honest, as long as Bailey gets through this game without injury, we're still feeling good about him heading into the season. But you would like to see him flash a little bit in this game. It would be nice to see him get on the board with a sack. And Aaron Glenn has said that the starters will play in this game. So my guess is that because they only played a series last week, he'll expand it a little bit tonight. I would expect that we'll see the starters play a little bit more. I'm not saying we'll see them deep into the game. I doubt we'll see them heading into the second half. In the past, teams used the third preseason game as the quote-unquote dress rehearsal, and the starters would play into the second half. And the idea behind that was because it's the dress rehearsal, you want to get your starters used to warming up after halftime. So the third game was always for that. I don't know that that exists anymore. Teams have kind of gone away from that. So I don't know that we'll see Bailey in the second half of any preseason game. And of course, there is that injury risk. I believe that there's a risk for injury. I also think, though, that teams have to balance that with the need to get your players ready for the season. So I think that we won't see Bailey deep into this game, but probably more than a series. So this will be an opportunity for him to go out there and play well because the Steelers aren't starting either of their top two quarterbacks. They'll go with a young guy, whether it's Will Howard or Drew Aller. So, a guy who's not super experienced at handling a messy pocket. It sounds like something tailor-made for Bailey to go out there and make an impact. And for me, this is just about getting a little appetizer. The main course is going to be the regular season where Bailey, we're expecting to go out there and make an impact. And I don't know whether Bailey's going to be, a guy who steps on the field and is immediately dominant, immediately looks like one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, or if he steps on the field and just a good guy in year one, and then he'll take it to the next level in year two. I think he's got so much talent, and I think his pass rushing game is developed enough that it would be surprising if he stayed healthy and was not a legitimate top-notch pass rusher for the Jets, at least on some level. But this game is a chance to kind of welcome himself to the NFL, introduce himself formally to the fan base. Of course, we know him well, but we haven't seen him thrive yet in a game situation. So I'm guessing they'll get a couple of series. I'd like to see him get on the board with a sack. It'll just be something that can get us excited heading into the season. Also starting this game will be Geno Smith. Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic had the story yesterday. There was some doubt about whether Geno would be playing in this game because he did miss that preseason opener against Tampa Bay with the minor ankle injury. And, I think that the fact Geno's going out there in this game suggests that he is fully healed because there would be no reason to even chance it if he was 99%. The first game against Tennessee is not till September 13th. Today is August 21st. So got a lot of time between now and then. Plenty of time to work through things. We still have another preseason game next week if you want to get Geno game reps if he was injured. But it sounds like he's now fully healed. And it's a little different practicing because I don't mind putting a guy out there in practice at the quarterback position with a minor injury because the quarterback always wears the red jersey, which is the non-contact jersey. That means the guy's wearing red, you can't hit him. And players are probably smart enough to know that without the red no contact jersey. Game situation is different. Game situation, you have to navigate the possibility of being hit. It's nice to see Geno out there, though, because he's new to this team. He's throwing to receivers he hasn't thrown to before. Opportunity to kind of work on things. You'd like to see the Jets go out there, look very crisp on offense. But even if they're not, I don't think that's the end of the world. I think that we spend a lot of time over analyzing the results of preseason. And hey, look, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. It's what we do. We look at the Jets, we analyze, and sometimes we overanalyze. And of course, you'd rather see the Jets firing on all cylinders than playing poorly. Every fan wants that. But you have to remember what preseason exists for. Why are these guys going out there and playing in these exhibition games? Well, it's really to work on things, to get ready for the season. So if things don't look great out there, well, you can go to the film. You can go to the practice field. You can say, this did not work in this game. Now we know for a fact this doesn't work. It's one thing to execute a play in practice. The stress tends to be pretty low in practice. You can't really get hit. The quarterbacks, again, are wearing the non-contact jersey, so they can't be hit. But even the guys outside of the quarterback, there's not a lot of contact in these in these preseason training camp practices. You hear about whether the guys are wearing the pads or not, but I've been to some of these in the past. Even the padded practices are pretty low intensity compared with a regular season or even a preseason NFL game. Training camp practices are far less intense than they used to be. So this is a chance to actually do stuff at game speed. And I think there's value to it. I've been talking a lot over the last couple of weeks about this, how you have these two competing missions in training camp and preseason. One is to avoid injury. And that has led teams to kind of scale back putting their starters on the field in the exhibition games because you're terrified of an injury that could impact your season. One of your key guys goes down in an exhibition game, could really obviously have a massive negative effect on your season. But on the other hand, there's another value that's competing here. You got to be ready for week one. And I think you look across the league, week one is usually a very sloppy week. And you see a lot of upsets that make no sense at the end of the year. You just look at some of the results from week one last year in the regular season. And I think part of it is some teams are prepared better than others to begin the season. There are some good teams that end up being really good, but they kind of start slow because they weren't ready. And I think part of this equation, part of the reason some teams aren't ready the way they should be is they don't take training camp, they don't take the preseason seriously enough, and they don't get their guys into game shape. I think that there's a difference between being in great physical condition, which everybody in the NFL is. Decades ago, guys maybe didn't take their conditioning seriously in the offseason. In this day and age, everybody's in great shape 12 months a year in the NFL. But there's a difference between that and being in football shape. Being in football shape means you're used to taking hits, but it also means you're doing the technical parts of the game. You're a receiver. You're executing a release off the line of scrimmage. You're making your cuts really sharply. As an offensive lineman, it means, you're using good technique, using good pad level when you block guys. And these are the sorts of things that can only be refined to an extent in practice. Again, particularly the way training camp practices are run in this day and age. And the passing games in the NFL just keep getting more and more precise. So you may be a quarterback and you may be watching a game as a fan and you'll be watching a quarterback and you'll see a throw sail and you wonder, why did the quarterback mess that up? It's not always the quarterback. Sometimes the receiver doesn't run the route the way he's supposed to. Sometimes he cuts too soon. Sometimes he doesn't run the route at the right depth. And I think it's much better to be able to work these things out in the preseason. You run a route wrong in the preseason, you can go back to the film, you can go back to practice and work it out and then have it ready for week one. You don't play in the preseason. Sometimes that first mistake happens week one, and then it actually costs you. So I think it's good to have Geno Smith out there. Again, we'd rather him look good than bad, but the important thing, I think, is just getting reps, figuring out what works and what doesn't at this point. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, it's not just about the starters, though. Of course, we will see the backups plenty in this game. There are some key reserves looking to build on strong first preseason games. We'll talk about Braelon Allen. We'll talk about Cade Klubnik. We'll talk about some other guys as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. There are certain flavors that instantly feel like summer. And for a lot of people, those classic red, white, and blue freezer pops are right at the top of the list. Sweet cherry, lime, blue raspberry. It's one of those nostalgic summer flavors everybody recognizes. Now, 5 Hour Energy is bringing that flavor combination into the new Firework Freeze 5 Hour Energy Shot, blending sweet cherry, zesty lime, and electric blue raspberry into one refreshing shot inspired by those iconic summer freezer pops. I got to tell you, this is my favorite time of year, and I can't help but think back to when I was a kid. Beautiful summer nights, sitting outside, watching the fireflies light up the evening, listening to baseball on the radio, maybe even a Jets preseason game, and I always loved having one of those red, white, and blue pops. Well, 5 Hour Energy is bringing that experience back. Ignite your taste buds with the flavor of the summer. Get a Fireworks Freeze 5 Hour Energy Shot today. For more information, visit 5hourenergy.com. Again, it's 5hourenergy.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Jets play their second of 3 preseason games in 2026 tonight. Kickoff time scheduled at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's the Jets and the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. Game will be shown locally on TV on WCBS2, and if you don't live in the New York area, well, you're in luck. The game will be shown also on NFL Network. In our first segment, we talked about some of the key players on this team, particularly the top draft pick and the quarterback, who are both going to be playing tonight, according to Aaron Glenn. David Bailey making his second preseason appearance, Geno Smith making his first after missing the opener last week. But preseason games are also about the backups because they tend to get extensive snap counts, an opportunity to get some game reps under their belt. And last week, Cade Klubnik was the big story for the Jets, finished 5 for 7. I thought played very well. Did a film breakdown on Klubnik's performance, and I think there was a lot more good than there was bad. In fact, the only stuff that I saw that wasn't so good, there was one kind of errant throw where Garrett Wilson made a great catch to extend the drive on a third down. And other than that, when Klubnik didn't do well, it tended to be because he got fooled. And you always ask what the context is. In the context of Klubnik against Tampa Bay, when he got fooled, well, this is a 4th round pick in his first career game. Quarterback's a tough position to learn in this league. So, a few pre-snap things that he doesn't detect, maybe one shot he could have taken down the field where he bailed on the pocket. Those are things that come with time. I thought in limited action, Klubnik did the stuff that he should have done well for the most part. Now he gets a second opportunity, and I would like to see Klubnik get more playing time in this one. Last week, he only got 2 series. Both resulted in scores. That was good. One of them was a touchdown Braelon Allen broke. But I think that now we need to extend the playing time. I talked a lot about this yesterday. If you want to head back to listen to yesterday's show after you're done here, please feel free. I talked a lot about why Klubnik needs to play, in my view, play the whole game, get him as many game reps as possible. But going back to something I said in the first segment, Klubnik doesn't play well. I don't view it as the end of the world because I think this is all a learning experience. You got a 4th round rookie, guy who's probably not going to play a whole lot once the regular season rolls around. At least the plan is not for him to play a lot. I mean, injuries could change that. Maybe Geno Smith, depending on how effective he is, that could change things. But the focus is on this season kind of being a learning experience for Cade Klubnik. I don't think you draft a quarterback in the 4th round because you're expecting him to play day one. If you get a 4th round pick at quarterback who ends up being a good player right off the bat, well, you just thank yourself for thank yourself for the luck, because that usually doesn't happen. 4th round picks, most of them don't pan out, but when they do pan out, it usually takes a few years for them to kind of get experience, understand how to make things work in the NFL. So this is all part of the learning experience. He may not play as well with more playing time, and that's fine. One of the things you'll notice during the regular season is sometimes like a team will suffer an injury at quarterback. They'll put the young backup in, and he looks great the first series or two. And that's because they're executing the scripted plays. Most teams kind of put a script in before the game. We'll decide these are going to be our first 15 plays. These are going to be our first 25 plays, whatever the number is. And that allows them to practice it all week, practice these plays to perfection. So lots of young quarterbacks go out there and look great the first couple of series. And then the game starts and we get into the plays that aren't scripted, the plays they haven't been able to work on all week, and they don't look quite as good. So last week, Klubnik got work with the ones, he didn't only have to execute a handful of plays. I'd like to see him get a little bit deeper into the game, because I think even if he's putting mistakes on film, that's stuff you can learn from. That's stuff you can go back to practice and stuff you can work out. So Klubnik's performance in this one will be interesting. Let me give you another guy who got me intrigued. I went to the game last week, and beautiful night in New Jersey, a perfect summer evening. I was glad I did, because my plan was just to sit at home and watch the game. And somewhere at some point on Friday, I'm just like, well, I'm going to watch the game anyway. Why don't I go enjoy the beautiful weather? I got to the stadium, and it was again, beautiful night. But as the game started, something dawned on me that it's a little bit difficult to be there in person for the first exhibition game, because there are new players and guys have switched their numbers during the course of the offseason. So you don't always have the easiest time identifying players. And on an early defensive snap for the Jets, Tampa Bay targeted a corner number 1. And I'm sitting there like, who is this guy? I'm like, it's got to be somebody. No, it's not Sauce Gardner. Sauce used to wear number 1. So whoever it was, fake Sauce Gardner made a great play on the ball. He got tested early, was in great coverage, did not allow any separation. And I slowly realized it was Azareye'h Thomas, the 3rd-round pick last year out of Florida State, who's competing for one of the starting corner jobs on the outside, kind of going up against Nashon Wright, who played last year with the Chicago Bears. I'm rooting for Azareye'h Thomas to win this job, because I think that he gives this corner group a ceiling that Nashon Wright doesn't provide. Nashon Wright's mostly been a backup during his career. He is coming off a Pro Bowl. I guess I should mention that, because of 5 interceptions, but prior to 25, he had 1 interception his entire career. When a guy has multiple years where he doesn't really pick any passes off, and then 1 year with a ton of interceptions, usually he reverts the next year. Usually you see the interceptions go down. And Wright's a guy who, he's feisty, he's competitive. You like the way he plays. You like to see the compete level, but not a guy who's like really a great cover corner. Azareye'h Thomas has the tools to make it in this league. The question with him is whether he can make good on those tools. I think he's a tough guy to project, because guys like him, you see it, you can see, like, if he puts the pieces together, he's going to be very good, but you don't know whether he's going to put the pieces together. It comes down to him, and it comes down to the coaching. The first week of the preseason looked good. Now, hopefully, Azareye'h Thomas can keep that going. Again, I don't know whether he'll be going up against Pittsburgh starters, but that could create a good opportunity for him if he's going up against backups, a chance to look good, a chance to maybe leapfrog Wright, who had gotten a lot of buzz through the offseason program. I think kind of began as a favorite to win an outside job, but maybe Azareye'h Thomas is coming on strong. Another guy worth keeping an eye on is Braelon Allen. Talked a bit about him over the last couple of days, where Breece Hall probably going to miss the rest of the preseason. Isaiah Davis, maybe he gets back next week for the Giants. So Braelon Allen, the path is there for him to carve out a big role on this team. I think Braelon Allen's kind of competing in 2 areas. One area is he's trying to beat out Davis for the number 2 running back job, because somebody's got to give Breece Hall a rest when Breece needs to go out of the game. But there's another aspect here. The question is, what percentage of the carries can he take? Can he turn this into like more of a timeshare? Can he turn this into, maybe instead of just being the guy who replaces Breece when Breece needs a rest and going in short yardage situations using his power, can he turn this into like a 60-40 situation? Because if he can, like, I think there's a path for this to make Breece better. I really see that potential. I think these two stylistically complement each other very well. Breece is kind of the speed guy, the guy who can make things happen in the passing game. Allen's more the power guy. He does have some soft hands. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but he's more the guy who can, get the tough yardage inside. I think that this could be a really good tandem. The question is, like, how good can Allen be? And he's been so up and down in his career going back to college. He started his career at Wisconsin, where as a 17-year-old had a phenomenal freshman year. He age where he really should have been in high school, dominated the Big Ten Conference back in 2021. Last 2 years were good, not quite as great, though. Comes to the Jets, first month of his rookie year looks dynamic. It looks like a real player. That kind of falls off. Then last year, off to a bit of a slow start, then gets injured. So he's kind of all over the place. We don't really know how good Braelon Allen is at this point. It would be nice to see him step up, though. What I really liked last week was 31-yard touchdown. Not just that he scored a touchdown, but showing that like extra gear, showing he's back from the knee injury from last year, and showing that, maybe there, in addition to the power, there's a little bit of a burst. And last guy I got to mention is Omar Cooper, who has been an oft discussed player for the Jets this week, in part because he started with the second team offense in week 1 of the preseason against Tampa Bay, but then came in, he played deep into the game, but made a big catch right before halftime to set up the infamous Cade York field goal, which I still don't think was good. We don't really know where Omar Cooper is going to be with this team this year. I mean, we know the Jets would love for him to claim a starting job. he apparently had a good week in training camp off a pretty solid preseason debut. This is a chance to really leapfrog, get ahead of Isaiah Williams, because if this Jets offense is going to work in 2026, I don't see any way for that to happen unless Omar Cooper is playing a big role on this offense. Now, the good thing is, as a rookie, he doesn't have to be the number one guy. We already have a number one guy. That's Garrett Wilson. But Garrett needs help. Garrett has not had enough help during his career. The Jets need someone who can take some of the pressure off Garrett Wilson, give Garrett Wilson a break on a couple of plays so he doesn't have to be the number one target all the time. Somebody who you can rely on to be a number two option. Somebody when Garrett's taken out of the play because he's double teamed. Somebody the quarterback can turn to. Chance for him to develop some chemistry with Geno Smith. Chance for him to show the Jets that he's taking a step forward and take claim to a starting job. Jump Isaiah Williams on that depth chart. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast. There are some guys lower on the depth chart who are either trying to build on strong starts or get the attention of the coaching staff. Make sure they get a roster spot. We'll discuss these guys as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Kalshi. Before the season even kicks off, everyone's making predictions. Who wins the division? Who makes the playoffs? Who's lifting the trophy at the end of the season? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade those predictions in a live market. Can the Jets win at least 7 games this season? Well, the Jets are currently trading at only a 36% probability, meaning a $100 trade pays out $265.85 if they reach 7 wins. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. Trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade $10. Kalshi. Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. The Jets are in Pittsburgh tonight for Game 2 of the preseason. Kickoff time scheduled for 7 p.m. Eastern, shown locally on TV on WCBS2 and nationally on NFL Network. Lots of players to watch in this game. Some key players for the team season, Geno Smith and David Bailey. In our second segment, we talked about some second-team guys, some guys trying to compete for bigger roles. But the preseason also has a focus on guys who are just kind of trying to carve out a role on a team, guys who are trying to preserve a roster spot or get the coach's attention for the future. I'll tell you somebody we haven't discussed this week who I thought had an excellent week 1 of the preseason. That was the 6th-round pick out of Miami, Anez Cooper. So much attention is paid to the Jets rookie class. And you have 4 picks in the top 50. You have David Bailey, you have Kenyon Sadiq, you have Omar Cooper, you have D'Angelo Ponce. So those guys generate a lot of attention naturally. And you have high draft picks, 4 of them. Then you have a 4th-round pick at a quarterback. Again, a rookie quarterback is always going to generate a ton of attention. So the guys who were picked later on, they kind of fly under the radar. And that kind of happened with Anez Cooper over the last week or so. But he played a heck of a game. He looked really good. I felt both run blocking and in pass protection. And I think Cooper's a really important player for the Jets' future. I don't think he's going to play a big role in 2026. You'd never expect a 6th-round pick at the offensive line to play a big role for your team in year 1. If Cooper's got to play snaps for the Jets this year, that means they've suffered more injuries than any of us want up front, because late-round picks on the offensive line, they need time to develop. But I do think going forward, he's an important player for the Jets on a couple of levels. First of all, I think that if you want to pass the test and be a quality GM and your head coach is as a guy who develops talents, if you want to establish that you know what you're doing, you got to hit on some late round picks. I think about the former GM Joe Douglas. And if you look at Douglas's record drafting in the 1st round, it's not spectacular. Some pretty high profile misses, namely Zach Wilson, but he did a decent job in the 1st round. Sauce Gardner was Defensive Rookie of the Year, a couple All-Pros. Garrett Wilson, 3,000-yard seasons his first 4 years. Elijah Vera Tucker, when healthy, was a very good guard. Even Will McDonald, the 10-stack season to his name in his first 3 years. And some of his early 2nd-round picks were pretty good. Joe Tippmann's panning out. Breece Hall's turned into a good back. The problem was, after the top 50 picks, Douglas never hit on anybody. The only 2 guys he got who ended up being good players were Michael Carter II, who was a 2-year starter for the Jets, and Jamian Sherwood, who's been a 2-year starter for the Jets, and really only one of those 2 years has been quality. You got to hit on some later round picks. And This is kind of like how I view the Jets' future over the next couple of years. If Anez Cooper develops this year into a quality starter for 2027, it improves this team on a couple of levels. First of all, you'd be able to move on from Dylan Parham, save some money, build up the rest of your roster. Use the money you save on Parham to improve another part of your roster. But also, we know that there's a quarterback out there. We don't know who it's going to be, but it's very likely the Jets are going to have a young rookie quarterback next year. And it's critical for the Jets to build a great offensive line in front of him. Jets have the pieces to have a good offensive line. The Jets have the start of an excellent offensive line. They think they have three cornerstone pieces there. They got Olu Fashanu at left tackle, who I think is growing and improving. Armand Membu, who I think could be a star at right tackle. And Joe Tippmann at right guard, who's very solid. The other two parts, not so great. Josh Myers, low-tier starter at center. You can live with him, but you'd like to upgrade. Parham, I don't think he's going to be awful for the Jets, but I don't think he's a cornerstone player on your offensive line. You've got to develop someone who's a quality guy. You really want to develop someone who's a top-notch offensive lineman to go with the rest of your core, because it's going to be critical to have a good offensive line in front of this quarterback. And we don't know who the quarterback's going to be, but this is, it's really funny because all season we're going to be talking about the most important player for the future of the Jets. It's going to be a player we don't know. It's going to be the player they likely draft in 2027 at the quarterback position. And everything for the Jets is building around this player. So Anez Cooper's development is important. Now, I'm not saying that Anez Cooper is a make or break player for Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. But what I'm saying is that this is the sort of player you have to hit on. And if it's not Anez Cooper, it's got to be somebody like him in future years. You got to hit on a couple late round picks because you need 22 starters. You have a bunch of critical role players who aren't starters across your football team. And you're living in a league with a salary cap. The math just doesn't work unless you find some late round hits. So Anez Cooper's a guy worth watching. And his first game was really encouraging. I loved what I saw from Anez Cooper that first week. Let's see if he can build on it. And again, I understand going up against guys who are practice squatters, maybe not even practice squatters. That context is critical, but still, you can only play the guys who are in front of you. And Anez Cooper, I thought, did a very good job in preseason week 1. Another guy I have my eye on for different reasons is Malachi Moore. And this is a very disappointing story. We talked a little bit about Moore earlier in the week, how he was playing into the fourth quarter of the week 1 preseason game. And he was not playing with guys who are very likely to make the team. The guys who are playing at that point of the game, they're probably not going to play. They're probably not going to be on the team. They may not even be on the practice squad. Sometimes when a player appears in a preseason game is as important, maybe more important than how he actually plays. And through the entire summer, so many of us have thought like Malachi Moore is going to be in the mix to be a starter at safety. In fact, if you'd asked me at the start of training camp, I probably would have guessed he'd be a slight favorite because Andre Sisco wasn't very good last year. I thought Malachi Moore was better than Sisco. Not that Moore had like a perfect season, not that Moore was a dominant player by any stretch of the imagination, but for a 4th round rookie in the mess that was the Jets defense last year, it was ugly. It was a situation that was not conducive to anybody doing particularly well. I thought that Moore acquitted himself okay. I thought there were some good moments. There were some bad moments, as you'd expect with, first of all, any 4th round rookie. But second of all, you'd expect it in a situation like the Jets had last year where the entire defense was just completely lost. But something's happened this year because you don't hear his name much at training camp. You hear Dane Belton a lot, who was a signing from the Giants I liked in free agency, kind of a low-cost move, guy who plays effectively near the box, a sure tackler, guy at the very least should be a very good special teamer for Chris Banjo, but somebody who could play is either your number 2 or number 3 safety. And then there's Sisco, who's kind of like hanging around as the starter for some reason because maybe the coaching staff likes him or something. I don't really know. Based on what he did last year, I don't think you could be terribly impressed with him, but he seems to be ahead of Malachi Moore right now. And when Malachi Moore is playing into the fourth quarter of an exhibition game like the one against Tampa Bay, the question becomes not, is he a starter? The question becomes, is his roster spot even safe? Is there another safety who could have a big performance and maybe knock Malachi Moore off the roster? That was something that seemed inconceivable just a few weeks ago. It's not that I thought Moore was guaranteed a starting role, but I figured he'd at least be part of the defense. I figured, if the Jets went, even if he didn't win the starting job, maybe he'd lose the job to Belton. He'd at least be the number 3 safety. And with Minkah Fitzpatrick being a player who's likely to see a fair amount of time in the slots, Jets could see their share of 3 safety looks. But right now, it looks like the 3 safety looks could be Minkah Fitzpatrick, Andre Sisco, and Dane Belton. Moore seems to be the odd man out. So some real questions about Malachi Moore's ability to not only carve out a role on this team, but to stay on the roster. he might need to perform just to solidify his spot on the 53, which again, I'm floored by this. I'm genuinely shocked at that I'm even having this conversation with you. And I think another thing that kind of hurt him last week is I didn't really notice him that much. I didn't see him making a lot of plays. And I think that when you're kind of like sitting there with the deck stacked against you, that's the time where you have to shine. Talked a lot about Omar Cooper over the last couple of days, how he was with the second team offense, but he went out there and made a play. And if he keeps making plays, he's going to start a discussion about whether he should be with the first team, whether he should be with the starters. I think there's a lot of pressure on Malachi Moore in this game. There's pressure on Anez Cooper, but it's to sustain what he's doing, to kind of keep the momentum going, to show that, I'm a guy you should keep your eye on in the future, next year as a potential starter. For Malachi Moore, I think the needs are more immediate. He's got to show that, he can build on what he did last year, because it doesn't seem like the coaching staff has a lot of belief in him. And that could lead to him not only not playing a role on the team this year, it could questionably threaten his roster spot. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy the game. We'll discuss what happened week 2 next time here on Locked On Jets.